Good morning. I needed that. Every time we get to worship together, I'm reminded how desperately I need that. I don't know about you. Well, we're picking up. We're actually backtracking a little bit today. And we're going to be in Mark chapter 10. So that's where we're going to begin at. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time over in Matthew 18 or 19. But I want to tell you a little bit of the story. I've told you stories about one of my aunts before, but my aunt was connected with another couple that was doing ministry in the area that I was at the time, and this particular couple, the wife was handling really the bulk of the food ministry that was happening in our area. And my aunt was connected with her because she actually worked with her husband at the time. He was a pharmacist. And so every time I would see my aunt, she knew that I was connected to this lady through ministry. And she would bring up that this lady was divorced. And I was like, okay, I wasn't okay. And then she would say, isn't that horrible? And I was going, oh, yeah, well, it must be. I've never been divorced. It must be horrible, you know. And then she would go on. She would say, like, can you believe that they let her do that ministry? I was like, now, hang on a second. Actually, I kind of can. And what ensued was a pretty lively, I would say, argument over the validity of someone being divorced, right? And I didn't even know the situation, right, of any of it. But something just welled up inside of me, and I began to come back at her. And I knew she spanked me really good. She had the Bible memorized. I mean, she got me really good, and it just kind of took me back on my heels. My dad was there with me, and I could just glance over to him, and he was like, "This is going well for you, right?" You know, I was young, right out of Bible college, in my first full-time ministry, and so I was just kind of taken back, and so I got to tell you, I wanted to win that argument so bad, for really all the wrong reasons, just to be right. But I'm going to come back to that story towards the end, but we're just going to pick up. We're going to talk about divorce today. You know, it's one of our favorite subjects, right? I mean, that's why I skipped it during Mother's Day, right? But I'm just going to read you our text today. It comes from Mark chapter 10, starting at verse 1. It says, Jesus left that place and went into the region of Judea, across the Jordan. Again, the crowds of people came to him, and as was custom, he taught them. Some Pharisees came and tested him by asking him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And so here's the question. Jesus has been questioned before. And Jesus knows they're questioning Jesus, right? Because they want to trap him. They're building a case against Jesus because they want to kill him. They've already come up with the verdict against Jesus. And now this is actually a very hot topic, okay? This is something that was, many rabbis were like, okay, where do you land on this? How does, is this okay? Can you do this? And really, instead of Jesus answering the question, he really asks a question in return. He says this, what did Moses command you? He replied. So he just takes him back. It's like, what would Moses have to say? So as we get into this, we need to understand that the verse in Deuteronomy chapter 24 is the central verse that all of them would have been, this is what they were talking about. This is what they had in mind. This is what's going on when this conversation comes up. Okay? And so Jesus just throws it back at him, says, well, what did Moses command you? And they said, Jesus permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away. Okay? And so they're like, well, you've answered your own question. I guess you can do that, right? But Jesus does something pretty astonishing here. He takes them back to the original marriage, okay? Takes them back to the original intent of marriage, takes them back to this baseline in which God has an expectation of marriage, okay? And he basically tells them, like, you guys are asking all the wrong questions. But let me remind you what's happening here. And it was, but first of all, he tells them this was because your hearts were hard. So he tells them, like, you guys were full of sin. Okay, you guys were not listening, not acting like God wanted you to, and so Moses made this concession, right? Because your hearts were hardened. Jesus replied, But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, no one separate. Okay? Well, I want you to flip over with me to Matthew chapter 19, and the same account is here. We get some little more details. And I want to read this to you as well. Okay, it says, this is verse 19, verse 1. It says, Jesus had finished saying these things, and he left Galilee into the region of Judea to the other side of the Jordan. Large crowds followed him, and he healed them. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They were asking, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" Okay, we got more words there. We got a little more context there. So there were two lines of thinking. Okay, there was a rabbi that everybody knew, Shammai. He was he was around a couple hundred years before Jesus, and his interpretation, his line of thinking on divorce, it was very narrow, very narrow. The only reason for divorce was adultery, okay? What very narrow view. It's like, this is it, okay? And then there was, of course, another view, halai, okay, was another famous, well-known rabbi, lived like 100 years before Jesus, and his view of divorce was very liberal. I mean, like, you know, I'm not making some of this up because Mike alluded to this last week. It's like, if you burnt the toast, okay, if the food wasn't salted well enough, if they felt like their wife wasn't aging well. Okay, wrinkles, right? Okay, yeah, so let me just remind you. You know this. You've heard me say this is a very masculine-driven society in every way. So much so that women really didn't have many rights. They weren't even able to be legal representation in any form in a court of law. Okay, let alone they were treated as pieces of property. That marriages were not happening in a co-equal status, right? And so you can imagine, right, all that's going on. So in a masculine-driven society, which of these two views do you think was they leaned towards? It was the very liberal view. It was the one, you know, right? Nobody, you know, was on the other side of it saying, "Oh, you know, we shouldn't do this. This is bad. We, you know, only in really extreme certain circumstances should we be doing it." They were like, "No, hey, we're gonna, you know, I want a new iPhone, so I'm gonna get one with, you know, I'm gonna upgrade." Okay, and they were doing this in their marriages, okay? And this just wasn't a cultural issue a relevant issue in Jesus' day. Obviously, when Moses made this concession, it was an issue in Moses' day, okay? So this is something that's been going on for hundreds of years, right? You know, long time. And so obviously things had been moving. And so this was a relevant problem in this question for any and every reason, right? And right, we land there today, don't we? In our culture, you know, the reasons are, you know, you can't count how many of them there are. Because however many ways things go sideways in the relationship, that can be the reason for a divorce or, right, a separation or whatever, however it is. And so we're there. We can all relate to it today, can't we? We can all feel it. And so Jesus he's verse 4, chapter 19, I love this. Haven't you read? This was a real kick in the pants. He meant it to be. This was like, haven't you read? These are professional religious people who have memorized, right, at least the first 5 books of the Bible. These guys probably had the first 5 books memorized and all the prophets memorized as well. And so he's asked, like, haven't you read? Okay? Haven't you read? And that's a great question for you and me. Because when I had that conversation with my aunt, that was what she was telling me. It's like, haven't you read? Like, I don't know that I have. You know, we need to read our Bibles, don't we? We need to understand how to live this life out that God has laid before us to live out. And so we're gonna turn to Deuteronomy. I want to read you these verses that we're talking about that are on the table today. This is chapter 24, verse 1. If a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her, he writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house. All right. Now, those words there were the words that were up for debate between these 2 different rabbis who had different views on why it was okay to issue a certificate of divorce. It becomes displeasing. Like, okay, what does that mean, right? I would argue, because we're going to get to the point, right, and you all know it, where Jesus says, you can only do this if, for unfaithfulness, right? And if you do this for any other reason, then you've committed adultery. Well, why doesn't it say adultery there? What is that? What's displeasing? The reason I ask this question, and I wonder about it a little bit myself. Okay, don't have all the answers. There's much smarter people than I. But it's displease. Is it adultery? Is that what it is? Is it unfaithfulness? I wonder. You know why I wonder? Because in the Old Testament, what is the punishment for adultery? It's not a certificate of divorce. I tell you that. It's a certificate for death. Stoning. They're like people picked up stones and threw them at you till you died, right? And so I wonder. This is probably part of the hot topic, right? So it says, verse 2, and if after she leaves the house becomes the wife of another man, and her second husband dislikes her, okay, and writes her certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house, or if he dies, then her first husband, who divorced her, is not allowed to marry her again after she's been defiled. Okay, so this is basically a concession looking after the woman. Okay? This is to protect the woman. Okay? This is to get the woman out of some like revolving marriage stuck thing that keeps revolving around. Okay? Actually, a certificate of divorce gave the woman some kind of control that she would not have otherwise. Okay? This was a concession that gave women a bit more power than they had none, okay? And so in some cases, right, if there was a dowry involved, right, in the marriage, in some cases a certificate of divorce would force some of that money to be given back to the wife being divorced, so that she could like survive. Right? Because you just kicked out of the house, right? You get this idea. Did you hear it? Leave my house. So you're what? You're homeless, basically, right? And so we see this. This is the verse in which is it central that they're talking about, that they're in the middle of here. And so let's flip back over to to Matthew chapter 19. Okay, I want to keep going here. It says, haven't you read? So we've read it. He replied, what at the beginning the Creator made them male and female. So he's giving us a lesson on marriage, right? Marriage is between a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, okay, number one. And said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife. The two will become one flesh. Okay, this idea that there is no autonomy between the two anymore. They actually, their souls and their spirits are bound together now. Something new has been made from two, and it is now one. Okay? And Jesus is just taking them back to the original intent of marriage. Like, there's no longer two things here. There is one, right? And with the idea of, laying this out, he's saying, listen, divorce was never part of the equation. It was never part of God's plan. It was, God expected, marriage to be between a husband and a wife. They would become one and then become inseparable, right? And so, this idea like, they were, everything could have ran through their minds like, I just don't like the way she cooks. Okay. Well, let's take a cooking class instead of getting divorced, right? Right? Or let's go out to eat instead of getting divorced. Jesus is like saying, listen, taking something from one and then separating again, this does not work. So if you have a problem in your marriage and it's like, say you got, it's like dealing with a splinter in your toe. Okay. Got a splinter in my toe, and I tell you what, I'm just going to cut my leg off. Like, that's kind of extreme, isn't it? Okay, and this is what Jesus is taking them back there. All this would have been rolling through their minds, right? It's like, this sounds extreme. It is extreme. Let's just dig the splinter out, right? And let's see if it heals, and let's go on, or let's cut the toe off, right? Not the leg, right? And so they no longer are two but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. There it is. It's to be forever, right? The marriage is to be ongoing for until they die. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? And Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wife because your hearts were hard. But it is not. But it was not this way from the beginning. So he just takes them back to the original intent of marriage. And Jesus, he goes on, I tell you that if anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. And as quiet as it is in here right now, it was just like that when he said it. You know why I know that? Well, let's read on, because the disciples are going, what? Are you kidding me? The disciples said to him, if this is the situation between a husband and a wife, it's better for them not to marry. And then Jesus goes on. He's like, yeah, right on. We can talk about that. Yeah, it's serious business. God's intent, right? We go back to the very beginning, right? And before there was sin in the world, right? When everything was perfect. Perfect marriage. That was the only time there was a perfect marriage, right? That was it. Adam and Eve, and then the fall came, right? And then we continued to make marriage about all kinds of other things, right? And the disciples, of course, are like taken back, and so is everybody. And so let's think about this for a moment. I think it's interesting that Jesus uses that one concession. He uses that one concession. And I think he uses that concession, because God knows what it's like to live in a marriage where the other person is unfaithful. This picture that we get throughout the Bible, that Jesus is the bridegroom coming for his groom, his bride, and he's made her perfect. You know who that is? This is the church. It's you and me. And in Jeremiah chapter 3, God, through Jeremiah, he says, listen, my people have been so unfaithful. I issue them a certificate of divorce. I just encourage you later to just read through chapter 3 of it's enlightening. The language that's used in Jeremiah to describe the bride of Christ. You and me. There is no perfect marriage. There's no perfect relationship. There's no, all of them are deeply flawed, aren't they? And a lot of times we wear marriage like some badge of honor. And I want to say this to you. It's more important how you stay married than staying married. You say that again. It's more important in how you stay married than staying married. You can have a marriage that's full of sin, full of deceit, and still be married. God's picture of marriage is this incredibly self-sacrificing picture that Jesus gives us to the church. And living that out is difficult. And so if you sit in maybe you're going through a divorce now, you went through a divorce, or somebody is going. We've all been touched by this, haven't we? In some form or fashion. But every once in a while, like my aunt, will wear this badge of marriage, like, I made it. Did you? Marriage isn't a box to check off and say, I made it. Now, don't get me wrong. Many of you have lived and had beautiful, beautiful relationships in your marriage. There have been examples for your kids and for others. This is great. But this idea, this concession that Jesus gives in unfaithfulness to get a divorce, I would add to it. I would also add to it. We can look through Scripture. Thessalonians tells us that if a man abandons his wife, right, it's better for him to be considered an unbeliever. Abandonment, abuse in a marriage. These are both things that God does not want you to live in the center of. I'll say that clearly. And I'll tell you, as your pastor, I have counseled people and helped people get out of marriages that were like this. Okay? And is it the lesser of two evils? Yeah, probably. God wants us to remain as faithful as we can, but God does not want you to live in a situation in which you are in danger. And so if this is you, we need to talk. Let's talk. Let us help you. And I will say that God's picture, the picture that we have when we think about divorce and the devastation of it, and many of you have experienced that in ways that I can't imagine, and the heavy, heavy shame that you carry maybe in that. I want to tell you that Jesus came. You came to the right person. Jesus was... You think about how Jesus handled adultery. How did he handle it? The woman was brought to Jesus in John chapter 8, was brought to Jesus. She was caught in the act of adultery, dragged out into the middle of the public square, and the Pharisees are there. This is like this is like the ultimate trap for Jesus, and they ask him, "What should we do with this woman who's been caught in adultery?" Jesus said, "You should kill her. The law says stone her to death. But I tell you what, whomever in here in this circle is without sin, you start." You know what happened? One at a time, they dropped their rocks. At this time, Jesus is bent down. He's drawing something on the ground. And what he draws on the ground, what he writes on the ground, we're not sure. One at a time, these guys left. And then Jesus asks her, "Is there no one to condemn you?" "Then neither do I. Go live a different life." I'm going to ask the band to make their way up. How does Jesus deal with divorced people? You know, the Bible says that, Malachi says, God hates divorce. And he does. It's a sin. But Jesus loves divorced people. Do you know that? You're not a second-rate citizen in the kingdom or in his church because of it. I'll tell you another story in John chapter 4. Jesus meets a woman at the well. And he's offering her living water. And she says, I'll sign up for some of that. He says, "Great, go get your husband and we'll talk about it." She said, "I don't have a husband." He said, "You're right, you don't have a husband. You've had 5. The man you're with now is not your husband." She was like, "Whoa, I see you're a prophet." Do you know what? Jesus used that divorced lady to go back to town. And she began to share who Jesus was there. The whole town came out. Said, "Meet the man who told me everything that I've done." And so, if you sit in this heavy, heavy spot from a failed marriage, be reminded, all earthly relationships will fail in some way. The only relationship that we can count on, the marriage that we can count on, God will never, ever walk away from you or me. He promises that. That's why he came. In the devastation and heaviness that this particular subject matter brings to people personally and to whole families, it's just that it's devastating. It's hard. But take heart. Jesus knows what it's like to be abandoned, to be abused, to be in a relationship that's found unfaithful. And his grace is sufficient for you, where you sit, in any place of it. I couldn't think of anything really to say to my aunt in that conversation we were having. I knew that my cousin had a drinking problem, and I knew that he fell off the wagon. And it was recent. And I just said, when James came home, did you let him in the house? She just turned around, went into her house, and shut the door. Because I knew she did. I knew deep down inside, she knew what grace was. Do you? Do you know what grace is? And so maybe we just need to pray together. Maybe you need to accept Christ for the first time. I don't know. It's a heavy, heavy subject matter. But you are loved. God doesn't hate you. He came to save you and me. And all of our sin is laid level at the ground of the cross. So let's just stand together and let's sing this.